So Bellatrix's wand has to be one of the coolest out there just because it's got this wicked bend in it, which is going to be a nightmare to make. So as we know, Bellatrix's wand is made from walnut, and I don't want to use American walnut, even though it's lovely. I think we need to use English walnut.
Would you mind identifying this wand? We need to know if it's safe to use.
Walnut?
So this piece was actually from a tree from my friend's garden, which he planted when he was younger, and I cut it down, well sorry, I cut the tree up, it blew over about 5 years ago, and I've just been keeping it since. Now if you've seen any of Blacktail Studios videos, you'll know that walnut can have a lot of inbuilt stresses, and I've actually tried to cut this piece in the past, and it actually cramped up on the blade and sort of stopped the bandsaw. So this video is actually from last year, and that was when I was doing just sort of ASMR versions, and I wanted to do a quick voiceover just to explain a bit more about how I made this one, because it's such an unusual shape and it was such good fun to make. Now you can see the knots there, and that's a really good thing because I want to bend it as much as possible, so I'm using nature there. I don't want to have a straight piece. So that's cut out, and then we're going to stick that in the lathe as usual because I'm lazy and I love wood turning. So walnut is a very popular wood, and I think it's more popular in America where you've got sort of black walnut where it comes out really dark, whereas in England it's a lot rarer, and I imagine the trees are slightly different because this piece is super pale. It was quite a young tree, probably only about 30 years old or so not the biggest to work with, and you can see it's actually not turning well at all, especially with those knots. It doesn't help at all. I've got some shavings off. The wood is probably a little bit old for what I wanted, but, you know, we're going to have to work through it.
Mr. Olander, I need to ask you a few questions.
Dragon heartstring, 12 3/4 inches.
Here you can see just how sort of gnarly that grain is, and I'm just marking out a few sort of transition points because I want to turn this as close as I can to the finished dimensions without sort of removing too much material to lose the shape, if that kind of makes sense. And you can see we've got some better shavings there. With the calipers, I'm taking out the widest dimension and just turning down to that with a little bit oversized. When I'm turning close to the chuck, I can sort of get away with not having to hold it and support it like I do with this rag, but in the middle it's worse. And you can see there I've got that sort of profile, working just from sort of two planes, and you'll sort of get a lot closer with your wands that way. I remember having to turn this shaft down to sort of a near finished size and then finding out it's got woodworm.
Woodworm?
So I wasn't actually too worried about that woodworm because I didn't think this first attempt would work. Sometimes with my wands I prefer to actually just make a sort of a really rough example before I start filming, just so I got my head around sort of how to make difficult, intricate bits, or if I need to film it in different ways, etc. So that is the lathe work done, and you can see it's really not that close to the final thing, but you can sort of, you know, you get the sense of it. The sense of it is there.
Well, it's not very good, is it?
You must be joking.
I'm only joking.
Right, now it's time for the really fun and experimental part of this build, or making, I'm not really sure. It's not really a build, is it? It's more of a subtraction method. Anyway, so the plan is to steam bend this wand into shape. So the first thing I want to do is actually soak this wand for as long as possible, just to try and make sure it's as wet as possible. This helps with the steaming process because basically when wood is wet and green, it's much more flexible, and it sort of helps the steam inside the wood sort of melt that lignum to help bend the wood more. And lignum is like sort of the glue inside the wood. It's like nature's, it's like how it's held together, if that makes sense. So I did hope that water would actually start to bend the wand, or let the wood bend how it wants to, but it seemed to stay pretty straight. And you can see here, this is sort of how much flex there is. Obviously that shaft is solid and my confidence levels were not high. So this was the first method, is just trying to soak it with steam directly, but you know, it was getting a little bit more flexible, but not enough.
Reasonably pliant.
So after that first steaming, it has bent ever so slightly, and this is sort of more where the wood wants to be. So I'm going to orientate the blank with how the wand sort of needs to be bent. It just means I'm not fighting the wood when I'm trying to bend this much more violently. And now I know which the way the wand's going to actually be, I can remove a little bit more material just to try and help the wand bend much more easier and avoid the risk of sort of cracking or splintering. Also, as a behind the scenes thing, this tube used to be used for diesel and it absolutely stank. And this was a really makeshift method into some old ducting I've had. I didn't know how this was going to go, but I thought that'd be the best way to sort of give it like a steam bath, its own little sauna. In all my videos I try and put a few Easter eggs here and there. Some are really subtle because no one gets them, or they're just not funny enough and no one thinks to comment. But this one was, there's two nuts on the wall. Get it? Walnuts.
Unyielding. This belonged to Bellatrix Lestrange. Treat it carefully.
Unsurprisingly, that tube is still really hot and there's a load of steam actually still coming out, so I needed the pliers to get it out, and normally I don't like to flex on camera, but look at that.
Much more flexible.
This is a really crude jig I've made, which will hopefully keep the wand sort of bent in that shape, and more importantly let it cool down in that bent shape. Yeah, it was really crude and it only just sort of fitted in the tube, so, but you know, we make do. And if you're wondering why the text is not scrolling from right to left on the page, I am also wondering that because this was an old video from my old laptop. I've now changed to a MacBook and I'm not sure what's working, what's not. But I was so surprised when I opened this, and the sort of my timeline was so empty, so it's so nice to see how much sort of editing skills I've learned over this last year, and I'm really happy with how well that wand sort of fitted that shape. But I do need to bend it a little bit more, so I'm going to modify that jig just so it fits in better, and hopefully we can do the step once more. So I think I actually spent like 2, 3, 4 weeks making this whole video. This was the first YouTube video I did after I launched my TikTok, and the TikTok shot up. I think I got about 60,000 followers in the first week, so I was like, oh, quick, let's do a really cool wand for the first video, get everyone from TikTok across to YouTube, but that doesn't happen at all. TikTok's still going well, but it's a dying platform and it doesn't pay. YouTube is where it's at. So there we are, sports fans, that is the steaming section done, and I just didn't think it was going to hold out like this at all and stay in shape. It's still really curved to this day. So as I said earlier, I didn't think this method was going to work at all, and I thought I'd have to basically cut that curved shape out of a sort of a straight plank of wood. And I think that's not the best way to go, and you'll see on sort of, if you think of curved Windsor chairs, it's always steam bent because the grain is then following the shape of the curve, and the wand it would be much stronger that way. So now it's time for the fun section, which is shaping this wand and adding all those incredible textures to the handle, which I was not looking forward to. Now carving really is not my forte, but I just like to go at it slowly, keep trying to do it from sort of each plane, keep referring back to the original wand I'm copying. At this point I've got the main shape, and I can now start sort of adding all those sort of really tiny textures to the wand, which is actually a bit easier than I thought. But you do need a super sharp chisel, especially because in the wood like this, where the grain, because this is quite a knotty piece, so the grain's sort of going in all directions, and it's not, you know, it's not behaving as you'd like it to. And screens often have the effect of making things look a lot bigger, especially when I'm this close and zoomed in. So if you want to get a better scale of sort of how intricate this is, Move your phone or laptop screen away from you until sort of your thumb's about the same size as mine, and then you'll see how sort of tiny and minute all these little details are. So the logic here is to use sawdust from the same piece of wood, then hopefully you get the sort of same colour match exactly for the wand. This is basically a natural filler sort of thing, but I think this glue, it didn't really work out well because it came out quite dark, but once it's hardened you can scrape it off and sand it back. And this is the sort of attention to detail I love. There's actually a slight dip in the wand. I suspect it's not meant to be like that. When these wands were first made, they were made from wood basically. Then the props were copied from that. So it probably should have been straight, but I want to try and get as accurate as possible. And even though this is English walnut, I'm going to have to stain it just to get it a bit darker to match the original wand. And I think it does look so much nicer with this colour. I always sort of practice on a few bits of the scrap wood first, just to see how it comes out, because all woods sort of behave differently with different stains. The sanding sealer then locks in that stain, stops it from bleeding into your hands, and I give it a quick bit of weathering and a quick buff, just to bring out a little bit of shine on the top surface. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me make Bellatrix Lestrange's wand from real wood, and if you've seen this video before, I hope you've enjoyed listening to a few extra facts and sort of interesting details about how I made this wand. It was a lot of work, but I really enjoyed making this wand, and I'm so happy with the shape, the colour, the carving, the bending. It all came out perfect in the end. So it's been so nice revisiting this video, and it's been a great reminder to show how much I've actually learned and improved this last year. A reminder, I'm Garrick's apprentice. I'm making every single Harry Potter wand from the films, from the correct woods. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe or consider looking at my Patreon for ad-free videos. Thank you.
Who knows how to play? Itchy, bitty, baby. Potter.
Bellatrix Lestrange.